At the beginning of the 1900s, Argentina was one of the world's 10 richest countries. Per capita income was higher than even France's and twice as high as Italy. Buenos Aires was known as the Paris of South America. Today, however, inflation stands at 211%. 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. It has gone bankrupt 5 times in 100 years. It owes the IMF $44 billion. In 2023, a new president was elected, Javier Milei. He is an anarcho-capitalist who waves a chainsaw, wants to shut down the central bank, and says he will convert the economy to dollar. He is either crazy or a genius. So how did Argentina get here? And could Milei's crazy plan work? Let's talk about it. 1989. Inflation is 3,000%. Prices in stores are updated twice a day. 2001. Banks are closing. People can't access their savings. The streets are in turmoil. 2018. The peso loses 50% of its value. The IMF grants a $57 billion loan, the largest in its history. 2023. Inflation hits 211%. The middle class is disappearing. This isn't just bad luck. Argentina has been repeating the same mistakes over and over for 100 years. As Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So why isn't Argentina learning? And now that the radical president Milei has come to power, will he really be the solution? Or will a new disaster begin? At the end of the 19th century, Argentina was a miraculous country. The vast Pampas plains were the world's most fertile agricultural lands. Beef, wheat, and wool exports boomed. A wave of immigration from Europe began. Italians, Spaniards, and Germans arrived. The population grew from 1.8 million in 1870 to 7.9 million in 1914. In 1913, Argentina ranked 10th in the world in per capita income. It was on par with the US and the UK. Buenos Aires boasted opera houses, wide boulevards, and magnificent buildings. Wealthy Argentines vacationed in Paris and imported furniture from Europe. The cliché of the rich Argentine comes from this period. The Great Depression of 1929 changed everything. World trade collapsed. Argentine exports fell by 40%, but the real problem was political. A military coup took place in 1930. There would be 6 more coups until 1976. Each coup ruined the economy a little more. Juan Perón came to power in 1946. He implemented populist policies, massive public spending, nationalizations, protectionism. He was popular in the short term, but in the long term, he ruined the economy. Argentina shifted to a closed economy. Import bans were imposed, tariffs skyrocketed, competition was eliminated, productivity declined, and innovation came to a standstill. Hyperinflation period, 1970 to 1990. After the 1970s, Argentina entered an inflationary hell. Governments covered budget deficits by printing money. Result? Prices became uncontrollable. In 1989, inflation would reach 3,079%. Yes, 3,000% inflation. Prices in markets were updated in the morning and afternoon. People spent their salaries as soon as they received them, because if they waited until tomorrow, their money would become worth. The currency was constantly being reset to zero. Since 1970, the peso has been reset 13 times. 1 peso in 1970 is worth 10 trillion pesos today. The 2001 crisis, economic collapse. In the 1990s, President Carlos Menem pegged the peso to the dollar. 1 peso equals $1. This worked initially. Inflation fell. Foreign investment came in. But the problem, the economy was not growing. Unemployment was rising. The government continued to borrow. The system was unsustainable. In 2001, the system collapsed. The government declared a corralito. Banks closed. People could not access their savings. A maximum of 250 pesos could be withdrawn per month. The streets were in turmoil. The president resigned. Within 2 weeks, there were 5 different presidents. The peso was floated and lost 75% of its value. The economy shrank by 11%. Unemployment rose to 25%. The 2018 crisis. The return of the IMF. Mauricio Macri was elected president in 2015. He promised free market reforms, but the economy did not improve. Inflation rose and the peso lost value again. In 2018, a $57 billion loan was taken from the IMF, the largest loan in IMF history. But even that wasn't enough. In 2019, the peso lost another 50% of its value. 2020 to 2023, total disaster. Alberto Fernandez was elected president. The pandemic hit. The economy shrank by 10%. The government printed money. Inflation skyrocketed. By 2023, inflation 211%. Poverty 40%. The central bank's reserves are in the red. In other words, it has no dollars. It is in debt. The Milei revolution. The chainsaw president. Javier Milei is an economist, but he is no ordinary one. He is someone who shouts about economics on television, has long hair, and describes the central bank as a gang of crooks. In his 2023 campaign, he takes the stage with a chainsaw, declaring, "I will shrink the state," he shouts. "Afuera! Out!" He says he will shut down public institutions. He has no political career. He doesn't even have a party. But in November 2023, he was elected president with 56% of the vote. Why? Because people are fed up with traditional politicians. His plan, shock therapy. Milei came to power in December 2023. What did he do in his first 100 days? 1. Cut public spending. He closed 9 ministries, reducing them from 18 to 9. Thousands of public employees were laid off. Subsidies were cut. Electricity, gas, and transportation prices increased 2 to 3 times. The result? Pain in the short term. Poverty rose from 40% to 55%, but the budget deficit was closed. For the first time in 12 years, there was a budget surplus. 2. Devaluation. He devalued the official dollar exchange rate by 54%. $1 went from 350 pesos to 800 pesos. Goal: close the gap between the black market and official exchange rate. Result: inflation rose in the short term. It reached 25% monthly in December 2023, but it started to decline in mid-2024. 3. Deregulation. Rent controls were lifted. Price controls were removed. Trade restrictions were reduced. Over 300 laws were repealed. Result: the market experienced a shock, but flexibility increased. 4. Dollarization plan, not yet implemented. Milei's most radical plan: completely abolish the peso and dollarize the economy. In other words, the dollar will become the official currency in Argentina. Why? Because the Argentine government cannot control itself. It constantly prints money and creates inflation. He thinks that if there is no peso, they cannot print money and inflation will not occur, but this is a very simplistic approach. It would be extremely strange to abolish a country's currency for this reason. So, are there any countries that have implemented this strategy and been successful? Of course. For example, Ecuador dollarized in 2000. Inflation dropped from 96% to 3%. Panama and El Salvador also dollarized. All are more stable. But there's a problem. You need dollars to dollarize. Argentina has no reserve. That's why it hasn't been implemented yet. So why is Argentina constantly sinking and unable to rise? Let's talk a little about that. 1. Institutional weakness. There is no rule of law in Argentina. There is no trust in contract, the judiciary is politicized, and corruption is widespread. In such situations, foreign investors do not make long-term investment because tomorrow the rules may change. 2. Populist cycle. After every crisis, a populist leader comes to power. They increase public spending. There is short-term improvement. In the long term, inflation explodes. Then crisis, then a new populist. The cycle continues like this. 3. Lack of monetary policy discipline. Argentine governments cannot control themselves. They close the budget deficit by printing money. The central bank is not independent. Result: chronic inflation. So what lessons can investors learn from this story? Lesson 1. Institutions are everything. Argentina has natural resources and an educated population, yet its institutions are quite weak. Result: a century of crisis. Investor takeaway. When investing in a country, look at its institutional framework. Is the rule of law upheld? Is the central bank independent? What is the level of corruption? These factors are far more important than economic data. Lesson 2. Populism is poison. Short-term relief leads to long-term disaster. Argentina is a case study. Investor takeaway. Be cautious when populist leaders come to power. Markets may react positively in the short term, but problems multiply in the long term. Lesson 3. Is dollarization a shield or a sword? Dollarization ends inflation, but also ends flexibility. You cannot use monetary policy in a crisis. Investor takeaway. If there is a dollarization debate in emerging markets, short-term stability comes, but long-term growth slows. Adjust your position accordingly. Argentina is the greatest economic tragedy of the 20th century. The road from wealth to disaster. 5 bankruptcies in 100 years. 13 currency risks. Constant inflation. As an investor, Argentina teaches you this: geography is not destiny. Policy is destiny. With the right policies, nothing is impossible. With the wrong policies, no wealth is sustainable. What do you think? Can Milei save Argentina? Or are we on the brink of a new disaster? Let's discuss in the comments.